Okay, well, howdy, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you are watching this. A lot of people have been on me about not making videos and reading my Substacks to y'all anymore. So I'm going to pick up with the one that people have been long pressing me to put into video format. And here it is. It's called The Long Shadow. And let me make sure I'm sharing. Yes, I am. Okay. This is called The Long Shadow, What the Democratic Party Did to Abraham Lincoln in 1860-61 and Why It Feels Eerily Familiar Today, by Samuel E. Roberson Jr., a.k.a. Sammy the Squirrel, December the 1st, 2025. I've been digging back into how the Civil War started lately, and I put this new program called Comment by Perplexity to research how the Civil War started and the actions the Democrat Party took. The okay, there is wait a minute. Started and the Democrat Party took, and the more I read, the heavier it sat on my chest. There is a pattern here that most of us were never taught in school. A pattern of escalation that begins with dehumanization and ends in either secession or civil war or something that looks an awful lot like it. Let me walk you through what actually happened with President Lincoln, step by deliberate step, and then let you decide for yourself how much it rhymes with what we're watching the Democrats do in real time today to President Trump. One, refusal to accept the legitimacy of the election. November 1860 and March 1861. Lincoln won 180 electoral votes and 39.8% of the popular vote, entirely in the North. The South warned for years that his election would be treated as a hostile act. And I'm going to go ahead and share this. Um, oops. Wait a minute. Close. In that, share this right here. This is, make sure I'm sharing it. Yeah. This is the election of 1860, and this breaks down exactly everything that the Democrats did to Abraham Lincoln to basically delegitimize his presidency. Now I need to get back to the long show. Make sure I am sharing it. Yes, I am sharing it again. Okay. Now that's everything in red or everything underlined is a hyperlink to proof of what I'm talking about. The Southern Democrats did not wait for him to take a single action in office. 7 states seceded before he was even inaugurated. The Democratic Party platforms in the South openly declared a Republican presidency illegitimate because it threatened their domestic institutions, basically their phrase for slavery. Sounding familiar yet? From the moment President Trump came down the escalator in 2015, large parts of the woke left declared his very candidacy disqualifying. By election night 2016, "Not my president" chant was already being rehearsed all across America. Within weeks, we had the resist framing his administration as an occupational government. preemptive nullification and threats of resistance, 1860 to 2024. Southern Democrats, again, did not merely threaten to leave the Union, they began seizing federal property, forts, arsenals, mints. Before President Lincoln could even appoint a cabinet, Fort Sumter was deliberately provoked by South Carolina militias firing on a federal supply ship. The goal was to force Lincoln either to surrender federal authority or fire the first shot. Fast forward to today, and we are seeing federal authority challenged in advance yet again. Sanctuary cities are openly declaring they would not enforce immigration laws. Blue state attorney generals are announcing they would sue every President Trump executive order before the ink is even dry on the paper. In intelligence official briefings, the press that would slow walk or leak any order they disliked. The lawfare playbook, hundreds of preemptive lawsuits filed the day after inauguration, mirrors the preemptive seizures of federal forts. Dehumanization as a political weapon. Read the Charleston Mercury or the Richmond Inquirer in 1860. Oh my God. These are the links to those newspapers of that day. Lincoln was drawn in political cartoons with devil horns, called a baboon, a black Republican monster, a man who wanted to force racial equality and destroy white Southern womanhood. Democratic members of Congress compared him to a dictator who would make himself king. Any of this sounding familiar yet? Any of it? Today, the language is more polished, but the effect is the same. President Trump is called a threat to democracy, an authoritarian, a fascist, a dictator on day one, Hitler, king. The Atlantic ran a cover declaring the Trump threat is real, according to the research tool, but I cannot get any of the links to open, so I only assume that they have scrubbed this from the internet. Entire books were written comparing Trump to Hitler before he even took office for his second term. The rhetoric is identical. To make normal constitutional governance under this man unthinkable. He will destroy the country, therefore we must stop him by any means doctrine. Southern Democrats insisted that because President Lincoln threatened their way of life, resistance, even violent resistance, was not just permissible, but required. Jefferson Davis's inaugural address as the Confederate president argued that secession was a defensive act against tyranny. Any of this sounding familiar yet? Any of it? Listen to the echoes. If Trump wins, democracy dies. This is the last election. We have to use every tool in the toolkit. Those sentences were spoken openly on the mainstream media and in congressional hearings during both of President Trump's administrations. When Democratic lawmakers say democracy is on the ballot, what they are really saying is that normal election loss is no longer acceptable if the wrong person wins. Institutional sabotage of a presidency before it begins. Lincoln's train to Washington had to sneak through Baltimore at night because Democrat-aligned mobs called the Plug Uglies and the Blood Tubs, which were some very bad people, were plotting his assassination. thankfully, Pinkerton detectives uncovered the plot. President Lincoln was forced to wear a disguise. That was in February of 1861. January 6th is the event everyone remembers, but the earlier attempts to block certification, the 25th Amendment threats, the Emoluments Clause lawsuits, filed the week after inauguration, the quiet briefings to foreign allies not to trust the incoming Trump administration, the Obama shadow government that followed President Trump around the world during his first term, all of it was designed to delegitimize and paralyze President Trump before the man even put his hand on the Bible. The final escalation, making national unity impossible. The Critterton Compromise and the Corwin Amendment, which are two of perhaps the most evil things the Democrats ever came up with, which would have made slavery permanently unamendable in the Constitution. Lincoln was willing to sign both of them if it meant keeping the Union together and staying out of a civil war. Didn't add that part in for some reason. Southern Democrats rejected every offer. They did not want compromise. They wanted separation on their terms and their terms only. Again, any of this sounding familiar? Today, we are watching Democrat leaders reject border security bills they themselves proposed months earlier. The moment President Trump endorses them, we watch the weaponization of the courts in blue jurisdictions. 4 separate indictments timed for maximum electoral damage. We watched the censorship industrial complex spring into action the moment a second President Trump term looked plausible. Compromise is now treated as capitulation by the woke mob. Here is the part that keeps me up at night. The Democrat Party of 1860 believed sincerely that they were the defenders of liberty against a tyrannical against a tyrannical abolitionist. They were prepared to burn the country down to the ground rather than live under a president they considered illegitimate. The same thing the Democrats are doing right now. I am not saying we are on the verge of a second civil war in the kinetic sense. Please, God, no. But we are absolutely living through a cold civil war in which one side has decided that the constitutional order itself is negotiable if the wrong man sits in the Oval Office. President Lincoln's first inaugural address pleaded with the South. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. He was answered 4 weeks later with cannon fire on Fort Sumter. I pray the answer this time is not the modern equivalent, because history tends to repeat itself, sometimes with the same political party. They are just wearing a different mask or hood, tries the same playbook 164 years later. And they expect the rest of us not to notice. Well, I noticed, and I'm trying to inform others of how history is repeating itself right before our eyes, and yet we do not see it. That's the end of this one. I'm going to make another one right after this, so I'm going to end this stream here.